Hey everyone, and welcome to DnD Horror Stories with DnD Doge. In today's video, we have a tale about a dungeon master leading players through a one-shot, only to TPK them in the end, with no rolls or anything. A story about how that guy shattered a Dungeons & Dragons group, and more. But before we get into those, here's a quick Stray Kitty update. She is doing a whole lot better since I first found her, and we have finally settled on a name for her, Luna. So expect to see her in some more videos in the future. And again, thank you to all who helped and donated and shared the GoFundMe for her emergency vet bills. You all truly helped to save a kitty. But with that said, let's get into some DnD horror stories. Tentacles and Furries TPKd My Party by Reddit user Rakanti DnD P2E. It had all led up to this. 4 mortals against a god. The day before, I had woken up in a cell with 3 strangers, a couple of halflings, druid and rogue, that were checking each other's wounds to make sure that they were alright, and a half-elf paladin with sunken eyes. No equipment, no spellcasting focus or spellbook for my human wizard, and no recollection on how we ended up there. When we eventually escaped our cell, we found out that our captors were wolvers, humanoids with wolf heads. Their behavior and social structure was similar to that of fantasy orcs. Their strength was in their number. They dined on other humanoids' flesh, and none of them were the sharpest tool in the shed. After finding our equipment and freeing other prisoners, we realized our situation hadn't improved. The prison was on an island, surrounded by a stormy sea. However, there were no available ships on our side of the island, and the other was brimming with hundreds and hundreds of wolvers. Many of the captives were kids and non-combatants, and we couldn't drive them to a reckless, pointless, and suicidal charge, even if we wanted to. It became clear that we had been brought to the island to complete a ritual for the wolvers. Their god had been chained by 4 guardians, against which the wolf humanoids were powerless. If we wanted to save ourselves and the other prisoners, we had to defeat the guardians that were capable to hold an evil and chaotic deity. We were level 5, but we weren't ready to surrender yet. Once we freed the wolf god, we vowed to destroy him once and for all, or die trying. The battles against the Guardians were surprisingly easy. The rogue enjoyed the help of my owl familiar to always apply sneak attack. Our paladin picked up a longsword that allowed him to deal 3d6 additional necrotic damage every time he hit with it. And the druid used his wildfire spirit and scorching ray to burn everything in his path, while also throwing the occasional healing word when things got dire. I had built my abjuration wizard to survive a couple of hits by starting with a level of artificer, while also debuffing our enemies with phantasmal force and web. However, all was not well. Our paladin was having visions of his deity, an eldritch abomination from outer space. He started to be able to use fleshy tentacles to strike his enemies in combat. But when he did, he entered a frenzied state where he regarded everyone as his foe. Me and the halflings debated attacking him to put him down, but his strength was needed in the final battle against the evil deity. Also, PvP is rarely fun in D&D, even when everyone's in on it from the start, and this was not the case. As the 4th guardian fell, a magic door opened before us. We looked at each other, an improbable group of adventurers, woefully unprepared to fight a god, but that had learned to trust each other's strengths and cover for each other's weaknesses. Our resources were not depleted, and we were able to finish a long rest right before the final confrontation. The rogue, the druid, the paladin, the wizard, and the DMPC elven cleric, which rarely used her spells in combat and was essentially an underpowered fighter, crossed the threshold to the wolf god's den. That was the last time we ever had any semblance of agency. The god's form was that of a hulking behemoth of a wolver with 2 heads. The Dungeon Master announced that the cleric was casting Bless out of initiative. After that, everyone was asked to roll a wisdom saving throw. I was ready to fail it, as wisdom was my dump stat, and I did not have proficiency in the saving throw. But I rolled a 19 on the die, and a 3 on the d4, bringing the total to a more than respectable 21. Funnily enough, the rogue also rolled a 21, and the 2-player characters that had proficiency in wisdom saving throws both rolled a 13. The DNPC cleric didn't roll at all. The Dungeon Master says, "The wolf god takes his enormous axe and effortlessly splits the druid in half from head to toe." We were stunned. Why was that the consequence of a failed wisdom saving throw? Why did only the druid die, and not the paladin who rolled the same? Why weren't we in initiative yet? The druid player was not happy, and started to pick up his things to leave. Me and Rogue declared our intent to fight. However, the paladin was suddenly behind us, with his tentacles around our throats, with no rolls necessary. The Dungeon Master asked the paladin what our fate was to be, and the paladin, after realizing that we wanted to fight, choked the life out of us. Then, the Dungeon Master and the paladin started to discuss how the wolf god would become his next deity, and the terms of their contract. 10 minutes of one-on-one roleplay, while the other 3 members of the party are unsure of what to do. Is this the end of the session? Are we going to have an afterlife scene? Are we going to be resurrected to do the wolf god's bidding? Was the DNPC cleric going to save us? Then, the Dungeon Master declared the session to be over. He was excited, satisfied, and utterly incapable of reading the room. The paladin was quiet and refused to meet our accusing eyes. The Dungeon Master asks, "How was the game, guys?" And the druid was the one to answer with, "Next time just write an effing book." There was no following session, as it was a one-shot in a homebrew world. We were under the impression that our actions would be meaningful, but the Dungeon Master only wanted an audience for a theatrical reenactment of one of his world's events, the rebirth of a god. Does it make it better? In a way. No one was too attached to their characters. But still, I wanted to play D&D, not watch a movie with a foregone conclusion. Now, I can understand a Dungeon Master having players play a one-shot through a part of a homebrew world's history, but to just have them up and die automatically when reaching the BBEG of said one-shot is anticlimactic and disappointing. I can understand the other players being peeved about it. Even if the wolf god is meant to win, at least allow the players to fight it and have a fun fight scene that they can play through. Though, what do you all think the Dungeon Master could have done better here? Let's move on. That Guy Shatters a Playgroup by Reddit user Javian Lost. Hello adventurers, long-time lurker of this sub, so I figured I would post one of many stories I have from my playgroup about a That Guy murder hobo that has been playing in our group for years now. I have many stories about this player, which I will happily post if people are interested. If you want to read the story for your YouTube audience, feel free. With that out of the way, let me give you the background. I had made some friends through work that were all about as nerdy as I was. I had messed around with Pathfinder 1st edition before, but this group was my first foray into D&D and the Star Wars role-playing system. I didn't really know a lot about Star Wars, but I was interested to try the system out. The party consisted of me, a Keldor Sentinel who specialized in hacking and stealth, an Iktashi Counselor, our party voice and medic, and a Mun Guardian, played by That Guy. JJ, the That Guy of this story, was probably the most well-versed in Star Wars lore that I have ever met. The Game Master thankfully caught on to this and tried to keep time vague so that he couldn't metagame information about what was happening in the universe. Our party met on a planet in the Outer Rim. All of us were to some extent refugees, exiled from Coruscant when Order 66 happened. We had each escaped the planet in our own unique way, having never met before. The first incident with JJ happened a month into the campaign. The party was sent to retrieve a Jedi holocron from an ancient temple in the Outer Rim. As we approached a rickety rope bridge above a fast-flowing river, we saw a group of mercenaries ahead, checking to see if the bridge was safe to cross. JJ decided that the best course of action would be to get the mercenaries' attention and pay them a sum of credits to cross. The consular and I shrug, figuring that we would just see how this went. JJ's character approaches the mercenaries, who don't kill him on sight, and pays them credits to attack the rest of us while he walks away. A key thing to remember is that the Force and Destiny roleplay system has something they call morality. It's basically a sliding scale from 1 to 100. Something like 80 or higher, you're a light side Force user. 40 or lower, you're getting some yellow eyes because you've fallen to the dark side. The consular and I had stayed strictly in the light side, while JJ was already teetering on falling to the dark side. This event left him dangerously close to falling to that dark side. The consular and I dispatched the mercenaries before making our way up to the temple behind the Mun. At the temple was a boss fight, a dark side Force user with a black-bladed Sith sword. Not a lightsaber, just a sword. We barely managed to kill the boss, taking the relic that he used as a weapon to blow out the airlock into space later. Once we got back to the ship with the holocron, we headed off to our next destination. While we were traveling, JJ tried to open the holocron unsuccessfully. We then got deep enough into space that the consular and I decided it was time to blow the cursed relic out the airlock. JJ's character fights this, saying that we could learn from the artifact. An argument breaks out, with the consular and I being on one side, literally playing tug-of-war with this artifact sword. Our NPC pilot then comes to us, trying to break up the dispute, before JJ proceeds to stab the pilot for interfering. The situation ended up with the Mun in binders, the artifact blown out the airlock, and our consular busily trying to keep our pilot alive. After the session, we tallied up our morality, and JJ's character, the Mun, was solidly in the dark side. JJ then proceeded to complain, saying that we were all ganging up on him. He had been trying secretly to play a dark side Force user that wanted to overthrow the Emperor, and we were his pawns to that end in character. He had never discussed that with our DM, ever. We then nicely told him that we were trying to have a light side campaign, not a dark side one. Well, if this player was trying to secretly play as a dark side character, he was doing a really bad job of it. You would think that it would be apparent, as when he paid the mercs to shoot at his teammates, that those characters would have thought it fishy that they were being fired upon, while JJ was able to just walk past them. Though, if JJ was, quote, using these other characters as pawns to overthrow the Emperor, why would he do that in the first place? Something tells me that this player isn't the brightest bulb on a toy lightsaber. Let's move on. We Get It, Your Character Drinks, by Reddit user Upbeat Ruin. I've lurked on this sub for a while, as it provides some entertainment during breakfast and snowy days, but I didn't quite have anything to contribute as my D&D campaigns tended to be decent, with nothing to air grievances to strangers on the web about. But then, this guy showed up. For context, this campaign happened in person at my college, in the Tabletop Gaming Club. It was DM'd by a friend of mine that I had met through the college's theater department. This was pre-pandemic, so I have forgotten a couple of details. The important thing to know is that the party consisted of a friend of mine, the sorcerer, a guy I didn't like, but later warmed up to with our mutual loathing of that guy, the shifter fighter, a guy I didn't know very well but was okay, the pirate, me as the ranger, and that guy as the warlock. We were running a basic campaign that had us fighting bad guys after they jumped us in the city, and a female soldier NPC was assisting us. Anyway, Right away, that guy cemented himself as the bane of my being for this campaign. If there are love hobos and murder hobos in Dungeons & Dragons, this guy was a drink hobo. His character, whose name I couldn't quite understand because he always spoke in this weird, affected whisper, was an alcoholic. That's it. That was his character. Like, okay, if you want to see how your character being an alcoholic affects their character and how they act, more power to you. It's just that there's a way to do it properly, and mentioning their alcoholism every 30 seconds isn't it, Chief. Every single chance he got, that guy made sure to have his character ask for booze, or complain that he couldn't have any. According to him, it was his character's way of coping with his mother's traumatic death by fire. It's cliché, but a skilled roleplayer can make it work. Too bad this guy wasn't a skilled roleplayer. We aren't goldfish and don't need to be constantly reminded that your character is an alcoholic with a sad backstory. I wasn't alone in this sentiment either. The shifter even snapped at him once, saying, "Just because your character is a drunken a-hole doesn't mean that the rest of us are," after he was nasty to an NPC one time too many. I could sense the frustration from the other players and the dungeon master. That guy was also a bit of a spotlight hog and chronic whiner, although that doesn't come into the story as much. For example, after defeating some cultists, I needed to make bandages for the party. Since I rolled a 19, and you thought the ranger class was useless, the dungeon master narrated it as me making perfectly clean and comfortable bandages from tearing up the cultist robes. In character, the party was super impressed, except for that guy's character, who bitched because they weren't magical and thus wouldn't instantly heal him. Okay, then I'd like to see your character do better, bucko, instead of interrupting Shifter's epic crit hit to show off your exploding tentacle spell. D&D is a team effort, not your chance to hijack the story with your weird hentai magic. Anyway, when it really hit the fan was the part where I rolled an 18 for survival and managed to take down an enemy cultist alive. I tied him up with the intent of interrogating him. This was the part where that guy swooped in and made a total ass of himself. This is also the part where the SA bit comes in, so if you're sensitive to that kind of thing, now's your cue to look away. Just demanding answers from this guy so we could go to the next part of our journey wasn't enough for him. Oh no. He planned to grab the NPC by the batteries and necrotize his private parts as part of the interrogation, and then cut his hamstrings and kill him, and then maybe kill him again for good measure. Who knows? I wouldn't put it past that guy to try it. Meanwhile, everyone at the table, including the dungeon master, were just kind of dumbstruck by this. Thus saith Shifter, quote, "Do not essay the NPCs." I don't remember what that guy said in response, but it was dumb. Dungeon Master told him no, and forbade him from using the necro spell on people's no zones for the rest of the campaign. Liquor and Sadness had to settle for merely hamstringing and murdering the NPC. Oh, and did I mention that during this interaction, this city caught on fire? So instead of doing the sensible thing and fleeing, the party was forced to stay in a flaming city, while that guy's character attempts to interrogate and then murder an enemy who can't do anything to him anymore. Eventually, the DM managed to get us out of the city and towards a safe spot so we could continue the mission. But guess what that guy did as soon as we reached the cloistered monastery? That's right, folks. His character started whining about how he wanted booze, because we must not have picked up the first 150 times that his character was an alcoholic. Having had enough of his BS, but not being brave enough for confrontation, I decided to just ignore that guy as much as I could from then on out. I don't think he learned his lesson at all. For better or worse though, there on out wasn't very long at all. The plague stepped in and cut our campaign short, and that was the last I saw of that guy, as far as I know. I'll just keep a careful watch for roving drunken warlocks. Dastardly little bunch they are. Yeah, that does sound like it could get annoying after a while. Perhaps that guy was just new to D&D and didn't really know how to roleplay well, or what constitutes as table etiquette. I mean, in my first game of D&D, I had my rogue use a decapitated goblin head to disarm a trap in a cave. And yes, he has a tragic backstory, and is an enjoyer of the spirits a tad too much. But after years of playing the character, I learned how to roleplay better, and used the cliché backstory and alcoholism for what I would consider some really great character development. So perhaps that was this guy's issue, just inexperience, and maybe talking to them out of game could have yielded some good results. So could he have grown as a player if the campaign wasn't cut short by the coof? Who knows? What do you guys think on this one? But that is all I have for you today. As always, I appreciate all of you, and may your games remain horror story free. Until next time.